What's up guys, welcome back to another GGF video, and today we're going to be taking a look at the brand new Deepcool Quadstellar case. Now you've seen this tease for probably at least a year now. I believe it's been at the last two CES events, it's been at the last Computex event. If you're familiar with this type of series, Deepcool first came out the Tristellar, similar concept, but it was a 3-chamber design. Now of course, being this case called the Quadstellar, it is a 4-chamber design. Now we've had this for a little while now. We've had 2 revisions of this case. The first one was a rush build to get a build done at PAX Australia. Deepcool had their first booth there. That was sort of an early production model. It was made out of bits here, bits there. And then I requested a sort of final production model for the review, because I didn't want to be reviewing an early sample that wasn't the final build, because I wanted to be reviewing the case that the consumers would be receiving. So this is the case here. Before we jump into all the good bits, we'll have a quick word from our sponsor. Time to cable this bad boy up. Are you sick of buying poor quality sleeve cables that just don't last? Build like a pro and upgrade to Pro. Introducing the new Pro Series sleeve cables from CableMod. Simply choose a Pro compatible cable on the CableMod website, configure the sleeve color to your liking, and slide the upgrade to Pro option. Also, don't forget to choose your plastic or aluminium cable comb color, which are available in white, silver or black. Once you go Pro with CableMod, you'll never go back. For more information, head to cablemod.com. Deepcool have teased the Quadstellar for over a year now, and it's finally hitting the shores. Its unique shape and clean lines have had people jaw dropping from the moment it was showcased. There's a lot to cover in the Quadstellar, from its built-in Adreno Light PC for the smart case functions, gorgeous subtle RGB lighting, unique 4-chamber design, 8 hard drive support, full ATX and eATX motherboard support, and multiple GPU locations really demonstrates what Deepcool is capable of. The Quadstellar is a big case. It's that kind of case where multiple shots really just shows its true size. From the front on, it's actually not that large, measuring 485 wide and 540 high is quite reasonable. But the depth is what turns this case into a monster. With a depth of 500, you're really going to need a large desk to accommodate this case. The chassis also comes in at 14.5 kilograms, which is actually lighter than I was expecting. The outside aesthetics of the case are pleasing with a futuristic look. The case is made from SBCC steel for the internal frame, beautiful aluminium for the chamber covers, which have an interesting rough black matte glitter style finish on them. There's also a high gloss finish on the 4 plastic front electronic ventilation panels, which I'm still 50-50 on, as this material is an absolute fingerprint magnet, but it does contrast well. And finally, we have tempered glass for the 4 removable side panels. As I mentioned earlier, the Quadstellar has a 4-chamber design. These are split into PSU chamber, dedicated GPU chamber, storage chamber, and motherboard access chamber. Each chamber is basically isolated to itself except for the motherboard, which runs on an angle up the center. Deepcool states that having each chamber isolated from each other results in better thermals. To gain access to each chamber, you can either remove the magnet attached tempered glass side panels for quick access, or unscrew the 2 thumb screws and slide the whole cover off. All 4 chamber covers are removed the same way. First off, we'll take a look at the main chamber dedicated for the motherboard. Up to an eATX motherboard is supported, but beware that all grommet holes will be covered if using an eATX board. There are other holes that can be used, but they are a bit of a stretch. Also, this is the main area for radiator locations in the case. Deepcool have provided a removable 360mm radiator bracket at the front, but max radiator length should be noted. I tried a water-cooled 360mm radiator, but the chambers at each end prohibited it from mounting on the bracket. But on the other hand, a BitsPower 360mm Leviathan Extreme radiator installed on the bracket no problem. The BitsPower Leviathan radiator comes in at 398mm, so I would say no longer than that for this bracket. I also found it interesting that you cannot install a 480mm radiator in the front. The complete hard drive cage comes out, but the front bracket just won't allow you to install anything longer than a 360. Physically, a 480mm radiator would fit, so if you're into a bit of modding and want to get your hands dirty, then go for it. Thickness for the front radiator is basically unlimited. The radiator I used is 53mm thick, and there's still plenty of room left. The second radiator location is above the motherboard. Bear in mind that this location is a tight fit and you're limited to a 240mm radiator with a MAC thickness of 30mm. The motherboard area also comes with one TF120 fan located at the bottom of the radiator bracket. Moving on to the next chamber, and possibly the most interesting one in the case, the dedicated GPU chamber. If this isn't your thing, you can still install GPUs normally directly into the motherboard like any standard case. This supports up to 8 expansion slots. Up in the dedicated GPU chamber, there are 6 expansion slots for 3 GPUs. Each GPU installed in this spot is connected to the motherboard via a PCIe riser cable. Deepcool provides one with the Quadstellar, but additional riser cables can be purchased. This area also comes pre-installed with a TF120 120mm Deepcool fan for GPU cooling. Deepcool have spent a bit of time designing this area and have even added plenty of holes for GPU cables to be run through. They've even added a couple of holes for water cooling pass-through fittings if you decide to water cool your GPUs up there. Just a note with GPU sizes up in this chamber, when using the center GPU slot I had no issues at all, but using one of the end slots then you may have fitment issues. I tested some Zotac GTX 1080s with bits power blocks, and the chamber would only close if the center GPU slot was used, but using a standard air-cooled GPU I encountered no issues at all. If you don't decide to install GPUs in this area, there is a spot for a 240mm radiator or reservoir. Thickness for this radiator is basically unlimited, as it's basically out there in the middle of nowhere. One thing I would have liked to see was Deepcool to use slots rather than holes for all radiator locations. This would just give you a little bit more freedom when radiators are installed in tight spots. Moving over to the storage chamber, we see room for 8 3.5-inch mechanical hard drives. Yes, a total of 8. Each caddy can also take an SSD instead of a hard drive. There is a 9th spot, but that fits an SSD only and is accompanied by a nice RGB Deepcool logo. You'll also find 2 TF120 120mm Deepcool fans sucking air in from the front, through the drives and out the rear. The whole hard drive cage can be removed, but my biggest gripe with this area is that once this area is empty with the hard drive cage removed, it cannot be used for anything else, not a thing. I reached out to Deepcool about this just in case I was missing something, but I wasn't. I would have loved to have seen another option for a radiator up here, or a res mount, or maybe have each hard drive bank removable instead of just being all hard drives in or all hard drives out. The final chamber is the PSU chamber. Pretty self-explanatory, this is where the PSU will go. Deepcool states a max PSU length of 300mm, but as you can clearly see, the room in here is basically unlimited. You'll also find yet another TF120 120mm Deepcool fan sucking air in from the front. I also found this location good for all the cable storage for your system. This also gives you direct access to under the motherboard, and there's actually a heap of tie down points as well. You just need to make sure you keep all your cables secured well and to their own chambers, or else the chamber covers won't slide on. Front I/O is limited with 2 USB 3.0 headphone and microphone jacks. There's no reset button, and the power button is located dead center where the RGB GamerStorm logo is. That's the case itself covered, but before we take a look at the mobile phone smart case features, let's take a quick look at the build we did. Acquiring the Android mobile phone app is easy. Simply search for Quadstellar in the App Store and download it. First you need to connect your mobile phone to your home network. I seem to find the app would only find the Quadstellar chassis if I connect it on my 2G network, not my 5G. Once you're connected to your home Wi-Fi, open the Quadstellar app and scan your network. If nothing shows up, there is a reset button on the little internal PC inside the case. This happened to me once, and holding this down for 10 seconds did the trick. Once connected, the layout is pretty clean with 3 main pages: light, fan and temp. The light page controls all the case's lighting with a variety of RGB lighting modes, quite a lot actually. Down the bottom of the app you can change the modes from full case lighting control to specific area leg control or external control, for example using your motherboard's built-in RGB control. The fan page is where you control all the fans in the case. There's also 2 spare fan headers on the smart control unit for extra fans. Here you have a variety of modes for fan speeds, and at the bottom you have control for all the inlet fans and control for all the exhaust fans. These all come pre-installed on the smart fan controller, so I advise not to get these mixed up if unplugging them. The final page is the temp page. This shows you the current case temperature. You might be wondering, how is it getting this temperature? Well, it took me a while to find, but there is a little probe running near the PSU, then up near the motherboard I/O area. This can be moved somewhere else if you wish. The next 2 options are a custom shelf inspection, where it really just opens and closes the front vents in a crazy pattern. I asked Deepcool if this was required for anything, and they said no. Then finally, the last 2 options allow you to open and close the front vents manually. There are also dust filters magnet mounted behind each vent, which are removable. The case also has a high temp feature implemented in it. If the case ambient temperature reaches a certain temp, the front vents will automatically open. I had to reach out to Deepcool to find out what this temperature was. 38 degrees will force the vents open, and 35 degrees will automatically close them again. This feature cannot be disabled. Unfortunately, there is no way for you to custom set this high temp temperature. I stressed to Deepcool that they need to add this option in a future app update. Now, no case is perfect, so let's have a look at some of the issues I ran into, or some of the things I didn't quite like. Now, I mentioned this earlier, the hard drive area. I really wished they sort of came up with an alternate area. You could take the hard drives out and use something else, because nobody wants to have 8 or 9 hard drives just sitting in their case all the time, or the ability to have 8 and 9 hard drives and not use them, because we all know more and more people are moving away from mechanical drives and moving more towards SSD. Speaking of the hard drives, now all the caddies were plastic. I'll actually cover some of the more other areas that were plastic as well, because Deepcool are trying to bring this out at a reasonable price. I'll cover this later on, the price wise, but some areas that are plastic, the front is plastic. Now Deepcool could have easily made this out of aluminium panels. Also the hard drive caddies, every one of those are made of plastic. Now hard drive caddies, I don't really care what they're made out of. I don't think we need aluminium or steel hard drive caddies. Most of the time people won't use them. I do think the front, they could have tried to make these a little bit nicer than just the high gloss plastic, because these are a little bit flimsy. You can see I've got the case, I've turned the case off with the vents out. Now if you were to pick this up, these are quite flimsy. Actually on the previous model version of this case, the pre-production release, I actually did sort of snap one of these by picking it up and knocking it. So they are very delicate. I would suggest when you do transport this, make sure the panels are locked into their place. So they've obviously done that to try and save a bit of cost, because they don't want to bring this out at $1,000, which I think they could have easily done, but they haven't. Another area is where I mentioned all the glass side panels are attached on by magnets. Those magnets are way too strong. It literally, as you're going to line up the panel to sort of fix it in place, it literally rips the panel out of your hand. And now I did have some problems where when you are pulling the panel off, I did have some magnets physically came off the case. Now they are glued in. I did reach out to Deepcool about that. They did say they have now fixed that. The first few early run models, which is this one, whether they've changed the glue that stuck them on, or they've made the magnets a little bit weaker. So that is good to know. There's no USB 3.1, you might be wondering. Now I can only assume, because this has been out, sort of announced sort of at least a year ago, they probably sort of started this before sort of USB 3.1 was the trend. And I guess they're not going to sort of panel this case, because I didn't mention, but this whole front area is aluminium around each chamber. It seems to be done out of one block of aluminum, each sort of cover, this bit here. And where the I/O controls are up the top, they probably weren't going to mill a whole nother panel just for USB 3.1. And there's no real way to get an upgrade option, because as I said, that is one whole aluminium sort of panel there. Another area I want to sort of take a look at is the vent noise. Now, the case does do a startup sequence every single time you turn it off. You cannot change it. It opens the vents and closes them 3 times, and then it sticks to the closed position. I reached out to Deepcool asking, can I turn it off? They said you can't. It would be nice. I'm not sure why it needs to do that. Maybe it does a bit of calibrating with the actuators inside. I'm not sure. So by doing that, it does have a bit of vent noise. I mean, whenever you open the vents, they'll make a noise, because it is understandable. They are sort of fast moving actuators. I will turn it on now just to give you an idea on what this sounds like. Now my microphone is here. I'm just going to leave it here, and I'll have a feel on how noisy it actually is. So yeah, so that's them opening and closing. Now, if you are in a silent room, you can definitely hear that. You're probably gonna hear it no matter what sort of noise environment is going on in your room. So if you want a real quiet PC, it's something you're just gonna have to live with. I guess you could probably disconnect the power if you want to do that, but then that really sort of eliminates the whole purpose of this sort of opening front design. All right, lastly, I do want to cover is the price. Now, for US guys, it's looking at about $399 US, which I think is a pretty damn good price. For us Australian folks, we're looking at $589. Now, I remember when the Tri-Stellar came out a few years ago, even after a year or so after the Tri-Stellar was out, that was going for around $600. On sale, it was around $500. Now, if you compare the Tri-Stellar to this case, Tri-Stellar was, I think, 3 SSD support, 1 GPU support. It was MITx only. This case absolutely blows it away in pretty much every department there is, except for size, of course. This is a much bigger case. So you are getting a lot more case for pretty much the same value that the Tri-Stellar came out. But yeah, overall, I was impressed with this case. I was expecting it to have sort of more issues than it actually did, but I'm really surprised Deepcool has sort of really knuckled down, and they have brought out quite a functional case. I see a lot of people when they see this, they see the photo posted online and they're like, oh no, that's gonna be crap, it's gonna be shocking. But it actually is a really functional case. And temperatures on this case, I've had this system built for a little while now. I've been having some LANs with it at my place here, and the system runs cool. It's pretty much no different than any other sort of case I've had around that has decent airflow, because the vents do open up quite a lot, enough that you can actually fit your hand in each panel. So there is quite a lot of intake in this case, and there also is quite a lot of exhaust as well. And if you do use each chamber in its own dedicated system, like the motherboard, the GPU and the hard drives, you really are sort of isolating the different components to their own sort of temperatures, and they'll be cooling themselves as well. But anyway, that's it for this video. I just want to thank Deepcool for sending this out to check out. I want to thank you guys for watching, and stay tuned for next time.